welcome to all. Tonight we will explore together a very strange episode which is recorded in the Midrash. As you know, the Midrash is a compilation of the oral traditions, commentary on the Torah, on the Bible. Now here is a Midrash on the portion of Eikev, which focuses on a verse in Deuteronomy, the portion of Eikev. Please open your curriculums. There's a PDF right below the video. Source number 1. The Torah says, Va'ahevcha, he shall love you. Beirachecha, he shall bless you. Hirbecha, he shall multiply you. Ubeirach privitnecha, he shall bless the fruit of your womb. And then a few words later, the Torah continues, La yiyeh b'cha akar va'akaro ubibehemtecha. There will not be found among you a barren man or a barren woman who is infertile, nor in your animals. This is the great blessings that Moses pours upon the Jewish people. If they will follow the covenant, they will be blessed in all of these ways. Now the Midrash, it seems, was disturbed by the redundancy of the verse. Once the Torah already blessed you, Ubeirach privitnecha, that the fruit of your womb shall be blessed, that apparently means that you shall reproduce and in a healthy way. Why then the redundancy? There should be no man or male, no man or woman who is barren, nor among the animals. This is apparently what prompts the Medrash to seek a deeper interpretation in this final blessing. What is the interpretation? Source number 2. Medrash Rabbi, portion of Eikev, Parsha Gimel, Piskevov, section 3. Amar Rabbi Yonason. Rabbi Yonason explained, La yiyeh b'cha akar va'akara min hatshuva. You shall not have among you a barren man or woman, barren from a tshuva, from a response, from adequate answers. It's not referring here only to biological fertility, to the ability of reproducing, of procreation. Rather, it is referring here to another type of barrenness. Sometimes you're barren, you're incapable of producing an adequate answer and response to those who condemn you, who criticize you, who try to prove you wrong, and you have no answer. The blessing here is you should not be barren min hatshuva, from a response. What prompted Rabbi Yonason to come up with such an explanation? For this, the Midrash tells a story, and quite an elaborate story, an interesting story and a difficult story, and it's this story I want to analyze tonight with you. But, of course, to appreciate the story, we need some historical context, a historical introduction. One of the great ancient empires was the empire of Ashur in Hebrew, or Assyria. Assyria was located in northern Iraq, above the Tigris River, reached up north into Turkey and the nearby area. And it was known as the Empire of Assyria, which at one time was extremely powerful. It was a world empire. As far as we know, Assyria was the first empire to introduce a new strategy into controlling civilizations and cultures. Namely, it introduced the concept of refugees. The Assyrian Empire would conquer a country, a city, a state, and would often relocate the native citizens to other cities or countries. That way, they all felt as refugees and would not have the willingness and the confidence that often comes when you're connected to your own organic land to revolt, to betray against the empire. This strategy did not skip over the Jewish people either. And here we come to what was one of the most important and dramatic events in Jewish history. It occurs approximately in the year 722 before the Common Era. It's described in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Malachim Beis, the 17th chapter of the second book of Kings. Take a look. Source number 3 in your curriculum in the PDF right below the video. Vayal melech Ashur b'chol haaretz, vayal Shomron vayotzar aleha shalosh shanim. The Assyrian king ascends over the land. He ascends over Samaria and besieges it for 3 years. Bishnas hatshiyis lo Hisheya lochad melech Ashur Shomron vayogel es Yisrael Ashura. During the 9th year of the reign of Hoshea, the king of Israel, and let me say for a moment, as you know, after the death of King Solomon, the Jewish people split into 2 groups with 2 kings. One king was the son of Solomon, whose name was Rechavam, and he reigned over 2 tribes, Yehuda and Benjamin, Judah and Benjamin, in the southern part of the land in the holy city of Jerusalem. Another king was Yeravam, who reigned in the northern part of Israel, known as Malchus Yisrael, the kingdom of Israel versus the kingdom of Yehuda. And since then there was a split. There were 2 kingdoms in Israel. There was a split. The northern king reigned over 10 tribes, Aseres Hashvatim, and the southern king from the house of David reigned over 2 tribes. Hoshea was a king of Israel in the northern part of the land. In the 9th year of his kingdom, Lachat Melech Ashur Shomron, the king of Assyria, conquered Shomron, conquered the Samaria. Vayogel es Yisrael Ashura, and he took the Jewish people and he exiled them to Assyria. Vayoshev eisam b'chlach b'chover nahar Gerizim v'arei Madai. He settled them in a place called Chalach, Chover, the river of Gozan, and the cities of Madai. Till today, the exact geographical locations of these places are still debated, but as most scholars agree, it's approximately in the area of Syria and Iraq and its neighboring countries. But that's not the only thing he did. Now that the 10 tribes of Israel have been exiled, or I should say the majority of the 10 tribes, and as you know, we still don't know what happened to them. Within a few years, they assimilated completely. Until today, there's the debates, where did they end up? What happened to these 10 tribes? But the Assyrian king exiled them and relocated them to new places. Now the terrain where they lived was empty. So what did he do? Look further in the same chapter of the Tanakh, chapter 17 of the second book of Kings. Vayavai melech Ashur mi Bavel u'mikuso me'avo me'chamosu svaravayim. Usfarvayim vayoshev barei Shomron tachas b'nei Yisrael vayishu es Shomron vayeshvu bara. Now the Assyrian king goes to Bavel, Babylonia, which is present-day Iraq, and a place called Kusa, and Ava, and Hamas, and Sfarvayim. And he takes the residents there and brings them to the land of Israel and settles them in the cities of Shomron, of Samaria, in lieu of the Jewish people. Now in the beginning of their living there, the Bible tells us, the new Samaritans, the new Samaritans who are now living there, did not fear God. Lions were sent there, and lions began killing the new population. They were frightened, they were overwhelmed. They attributed to the fact that they were serving the idols of their native lands and they did not conform to the new religion of Israel in the land of Israel. And ultimately, this population would convert to Judaism, although, as the Tanakh says, they would still continue worshiping their own gods, but they also now worship the Jewish God, so to speak, and converted to the Jewish people. The Assyrian king sent them a Jewish scholar to teach them about Judaism, to teach them the Jewish faith, the traditions and the religions. And these people who came from Bavel and Kusa, Kusa is the second city, which is seen by many scholars as being a place in southern Iraq, today's southern Iraq, are now living in Samaria as Samaritans in the land of Israel. Now, they made the center of their religion and of their life, Mount Gerizim. Mount Gerizim is, of course, one of the famous and most tallest mountains in the land of Israel. It's right above the city of Shechem, or in Arabic known as Nablus. And right above the city of Shechem is Mount Gerizim. It's well known as the mountain which God commands Moses when the Jewish people will enter into the land of Israel. They had to approach the two mountains, Mount Gerizim, and nearby is the second mountain, Mount Avel. And the Jewish people gathered at these mountains, and 6 of the tribes went up to Mount Gerizim, 6 went up to Mount Avel, and there they offered the famous blessings and curses for those who will live a moral and ethical life to be blessed, and curse those who will betray the morality and ethics of Judaism, as described later in the book of Deuteronomy. Har Gerizim, Mount Gerizim, was the place, the epicenter of the life of the new Samaritans, also known as the Kusim, who came from the city of Kusa in southern Iraq, brought by the Assyrian king and settled in Shomron, and Mount Gerizim is their new center. The Shomronim, the Samaritans as they called themselves, grew to become a very large number. At one point, there are more of 1 million of them. Today, they still live there. Today, there are 650 of them who remain. They have fought the Jewish people very, very hard after the first exile. You see, the 10 tribes were exiled around 130 years before the destruction of the first temple and the exile of the last 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, to Babylonia, through Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia. But after 70 years, Cyrus, the Persian king who defeated Babylonia, let the Jews come back and resettle their ancient homeland and rebuild the second temple. Now it was the Samaritans living in the Shomron who fought this attempt to rebuild the temple very, very heavily. Later, when the Greeks would defeat Persia and take over the land of Israel, and ultimately the Syrian Greeks would try to dominate the religion of Israel and Hellenize the Jews, the Samaritans, the Shomronim or the Kusim, would side with the Syrian Greeks against the Jews, which is the reason that Yochanan Hyrcanus, one of the famous kings of Hashmonaim, or in Greek his name is John Hyrcanus, destroyed their temple, the Beit HaMikdash that they built on Mount Gerizim. They did not embrace the temple in Jerusalem. They built their own temple and their own altars on Mount Gerizim. They still believe that on Mount Gerizim there are many holy locations. They believe Isaac was brought to the sacrifice by Abraham on Mount Gerizim, and many other things. They have locations that they visit till today. They make pilgrimages to different parts of Mount Gerizim on Passover, on Shavuos, on Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. So their whole religion is evolved around Mount Gerizim. They have a Kohen Gadol, a high priest, who leads the religion until this very day. Although, as I said, it's a very small number today. Yochanan and Hyrcanus destroyed their temple, but archaeological excavations began in 1982 on Mount Gerizim, where many of the old relics and the ancient structures and temple and altars of Mount Gerizim have been excavated. In the 500s, the Byzantine Empire massacred most of them, and they remained a small number which fluctuated back and forth. As I said today, there are only a few hundred left. They live on the bottom of Mount Gerizim, and some of them also live in the city of Chulun in Israel. This is the introduction that's necessary to understand the story of the Medrash, which we now begin to explore. As I said, these people are known in Jewish literature as Kusim. Why? They came from the city of Kusa, or from the country of Kusa, the region of Kusa in southern Iraq, and they were brought to Samaria by the Assyrian king. Now, before we get to the story, there's one more important detail I want to emphasize. How did the Jews see the Kusim from a Jewish perspective? How did they view them? Did they view them as Jews, or did they view them not as Jews? So this has always been a debate. Our sages often call them, and I guess with a bit of cynicism, Geirei Arayas, the converts of the lions. The lions converted them to Judaism, representing the idea that their conversion was not authentic. It was not motivated by a genuine desire to join the Jewish people. It was motivated by fear of the plague of the lions, which attacked them when they moved into the land of Israel. And hence their conversion was insincere and not authentic, and therefore should not be embraced. So over the generations, this has been a major question in the Jewish mindset. Are the Kusim to be considered as full-fledged Jews or not? So for example, take a look at source number 4. Jerusalem Talmud Tractate Shkolim brings an argument between Rabbi and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Kusi kenachri divrei Rabbi. A Kusi is like a non-Jew, Rabbi says, has the halachic status of a non-Jew. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Kusi ki Yisrael l'chol davar. Rabbi Shimon, the son of Gamliel, says a Kusi is like a Jew concerning everything. So there were times that the Jews looked at the Kusim as complete Jews who converted to Judaism and lived a Jewish life. And yet, that changed at a later point. And the Talmud in Tractate Chulin discusses the fact that one may not eat from an animal that was slaughtered by them. Why? Take a look at source number 5, Chulin Davav Amar Aleph. My time Amar Reb Nachman by Yitzchak, Rabbi Nachman, the son of Yitzchak, said, why is there the logic? What was the idea to prohibit the meat that's slaughtered by them? They found on the peak of Mount Gerizim the image of a dove which they worshipped as an idol. And hence they realized that they were entrenched in idolatry. In source number 6, bring up source number 6, Rambam, Maimonides, summarizes the status of the Kusim very nicely. Let's see what the Rambam has to say. Source number 6, Pirush HaMishnayos, this is Maimonides' commentary to the Mishnah Tractate Brachas, the end of chapter 8. He says this, V'kana vayar l'chamayim ha-Kusim. Let me explain to you who were these Kusim. Now, Maimonides, who lived in the 13th century, in the 12th century, he was born in Spain, he moved to Morocco, Fez in Morocco, then moved to Israel, the land of Israel, and then moved to Egypt where he passed away. He wrote a commentary to the Mishnah in Arabic. This is a translation into the Holy Tongue, into Hebrew. So the Rambam says, let's explain to you what are the Kusim. Vuhu. This is the nation that Sancheriv, this is the name of the Assyrian king, relocated from Kusa and settled them in the lands of Samaria. And the Torah says, the Tanakh says, they feared God and they served their gods. But as time passed, until they studied Torah, and they interpreted the Torah literally. The mitzvahs that they did accept, they used to be very meticulous about, and they would hold on to it very tightly. As the Talmud brings an opinion elsewhere that the mitzvahs that they did, you could trust them more than you could trust the ordinary Jews. They were very strict about those mitzvahs that they embraced. They were accepted to be loyal citizens of the Jewish people, believing in the Jewish faith and not worshipping idols. Then the sages inquired and investigated and found that they sanctified the Mount of Gerizim. When they researched further for the cause, they found there was an image of a dove on the mountain, and they were deemed as idol worshippers. And then they degraded them and began to see them as Gentiles. Anything you will find in the Mishnayos literature which shows that they were superior to other Gentiles, although inferior to the Jewish people, Kegoin Amram, similar, like the sages say, mezamnim makusi, you could make a mezumin, you could do grace after meals with a kusi. V'kusi amavarich, a kusi blesses after the meal. V'zulosim and similar things. Kol zekoidim shabatku achareim. This is before they investigated and found that they were idolatrous. But once they found out what was really happening, then they're considered inferior even to the Gentiles. You should know this, so that I don't, Maimonides says, have to repeat this principle every time you'll see the word kusi. So during the time they're living with the Jewish people, there are stages and changes in the attitude of the rabbis and the sages to this nation, to this people called Kusim, who are living as Samaritans in Samaria. Now we come to the story of the Midrash that I introduced in the beginning, where Rabbi Yonason explains that when the Torah says you should not have a barren man or a woman, it's referring to you should not be barren from a response, from the ability to be able to respond adequately to those who condemn you, to those who shun you, and to those who try to prove you as dead wrong. Bring up source number 7. Let's see the story the Medrash says to explain the view of Rabbi Yonason. There's a story about Rabbi Yonason. He was traveling near a city populated by the Kusim. Now you all know by now who the Kusim are, right? The Kusim are those people who Sancherib, the Assyrian king, relocated from southern Iraq, from Kusa to Samaria, the area around Mount Gerizim, Shomron. Today you have Shechem, as I said, right under Mount Gerizim and near Mount Avel as well. Rabbi Yonason was riding on a donkey. And his animal rider was with him, the one who was riding the actual donkey, who was leading the donkey. He's called a Baham, the one leading the behemoth, the one leading the animal. One kusi accompanied them, escorted them. The donkey arrived with the people, with Rabbi Yonason, with the leader of the animal, to Mount Gerizim. Mount Gerizim in Samaria, above the city of Shechem. I was a few years ago visiting Israel, so I went especially to Mount Gerizim, although it's dangerous today. On the bottom of Mount Gerizim, which there's a settlement, a Jewish settlement called Har Bracha, the mountain of blessing, because Mount Gerizim was the mountain of blessing versus Mount Ava, which is the mountain of curse. On the bottom there's a very fresh mikveh, which comes from a very fresh wellspring, where I had the privilege to take a dip and eat fresh fruits that grow around that mikveh near the settlement of Har Bracha. Nearby there's a settlement called Itamar, and other settlements nearby. Recent years have had many victims in the ongoing tension in that area. So they come to Mount Gerizim. Omar, it's fascinating because you go to these places, you touch the earth and there's so much history. Literally thousands of years of history. So I went to Mount Gerizim, and you could sense in the earth the depth and the layers and layers of history. So now we come to another story of Mount Gerizim, right? They're at Mount Gerizim. Omar kusi le Rabbi Yonason. This kusi tells Rabbi Yonason, Rebbe, ma'udein da hadein tura kadosh. What is the reason that this mountain is sacred? Omar le Rabbi Yonason lamahu kadosh. Rabbi Yonason tells the kusi, why is it holy? Who said it's holy? You guys decided it's holy. Because the Kusim sanctified, they worshipped the Mount Gerizim. That's where they built their temple, not Jerusalem. It was Mount Gerizim. That's where they worshipped. They believed that all the holy things happened there. It's the holiest site for them in the land of Israel. So Rabbi Yonason says, who says it's holy? Amar lo yosi hakusi. Rabbi Yonason said, why is it holy? Who made it holy? Amar lo yosi hakusi. The Kusi responds to him, Shaloi laka b'mei hamabel. It was not struck by the waters of the flood. When the flood during the times of Noah came and flooded the earth, the Mount of Gerizim was not flooded. Amar le Rabbi Yonason tells the Kusi, Menayin lach. What's the source for this? Amar le, the Kusi tells Rabbi Yonason, Loi kach ksiv. Isn't it a clear verse in the Bible, in the book of Yecheskel, the book of Ezekiel, chapter 22, verse 24? The verse says, Ben Adam, God says, Son of man, Emar Allah, speak to her. Speak to the land of Israel, to the country of Israel. Eretz loy mitoyharahi. Is this a land which is not pure? Loi gushma b'yom zam. There was no rain on this land on the day of wrath. This is a pure land. This is what Ezekiel testifies. There was no flood. Loi gushma b'yom zam. Eretz loy mitari. Is this a land which is not pure? Certainly not. This is a pure land. So when it rained during the flood, this land was spared. Amar le Rabbi Yonason, and Rabbi Yonason tells the Kusi, Im Kain, if so, God should have told Noach to go up to Mount Gerizim. Why did he have to tell him to build an ark? If on Mount Gerizim there was no flood, so you should have sent Noach to Mount Gerizim. Why did he have to make him build an ark? Amar le, the Kusi answered, he did it only to test Noach's faith. But really, there was no flood on Mount Gerizim. Shasak Rabbi Yonason. Rabbi Yonason remained quiet. He didn't have an answer. The Kusi apparently struck a home run. He proved from a verse in Ezekiel there was no flood in the land of Israel, and yet Noach still made an ark, and therefore Mount Gerizim is sacred. Amalei Habam, the rider of the animal who was leading Rabbi Yonason's donkey, tells his Rebbe, Master, give me permission to tell this Kusi one thing. Amar loi, Rabbi Yonason says, Emar, tell him. Amar loi Abam, the rider of the animal, tells the Kusi, Eina arazet tachas hashamayim, tell me, is Mount Gerizim not under the heavens? Amar loi Kusi, the Kusi tells the rider of the animal, El chutz l'shamayim, obviously, what is it, outside of the domain of the heavens? Every mountain is under the heavens. How can there be a mountain not under the heavens? Certainly it's under the heavens. Amar loi, the rider of the animal tells the Kusi, that's true. Now, ksiv. Amar loi tells him, ein ksiv. Doesn't it say in the portion of Noach, when it describes the flood, Chamesh Esrei Amal Milmaila Gavru Amayim Vayechasu Kol HaHarim HaGvoyim Asher Tachas Kol HaShamayim. The waters of the flood reached such a height that they reached 15 amas above the mountains, and they covered even all of the tall mountains under all of the heavens. No. You just gave yourself away. You said Mount Gerizim was under the heavens. The Torah clearly testifies that every mountain under the heavens was covered with water. Immediately the Rabbi Yonason went off the donkey and he became the rider of the donkey. And 4 million, almost 4 miles, did he lead the donkey, and upon it was riding the rider of the donkey, who responded to the Kusi. The Koral of Apostle and Rabbi Yonason said on his animal rider this verse in Isaiah chapter 54, Yeshayan and Dalet, V'chalosha in takum mitach la mishpat tarshi. Every tongue which will stand up against you, you will find wrong. You will be able to know how to defend yourself against the tongue that tries to condemn you. Hi! Now Rabbi Yonason says we'll understand the blessing in the portion of Eikev. You shall not have a barren man among you, nor a barren woman among you, not even among your animals. So Rabbi Yonason explained, what does it mean? You should never be barren, you should never be short from having the ability of producing an answer, an adequate response. You ubibehemtecha, mahu ubibehemtecha, babahamin shalcha. Even the bahamin of yours, even the riders of your animals, even those Jews who are simply animal riders. They're not the great scholars and intellectuals and learned people. They're the animal riders. They too will not be lacking the ability to be able to answer, to be able to respond. Even behemtecha, the bahamin, will be able to respond. This is the story in the Midrash. Now, let's ask ourselves the question, what was going on here? What was the nature of the argument? Rabbi Yonason is riding with his donkey rider. They come to Mount Gerizim. The Kusi is there with them. He wants to know why it's holy. Rabbi Yonason says, who says it's holy? So he says, because there was no flood there. Now I should mention, there is another medrash elsewhere which recounts the story. This is a medrash Noach. This medrash is in Eikev, another medrash in Noach. The story is recounted there as well, with a little different. Namely, the Kusi asked Rabbi Yonasan, where are you going? He said he's going to pray at Jerusalem. He said, why pray at Jerusalem, where there's a ruined house? Why not pray at Mount Gerizim? And then they had this exchange. But regardless, the point is the same. Why did the Kusi want to prove that there was no flood there? What did he gain from discovering that there was no flood there? And Rabbi Yonasan wanted to say that there is a flood there. What was the nature of the argument? If there was no flood there or there was a flood there, how does it prove the point? Let me explain the question. The verse that he brought from Yecheskel, from Ezekiel, was that in the whole land there was no flood. So the whole land is holy. Ezekiel doesn't say on Mount Gerizim there was no flood. Ezekiel says in the whole land. If you remember the verse, Eretz loy mitayharehi loy gushma b'yom zam. Eretz loy mitayharehi. The whole land is pure. Didn't have the flood. So how does the Kusi get from this verse to prove that Mount Gerizim didn't have the flood and therefore it's holy versus every other place? There was no flood in the land. It's a holy land. There was no flood on Mount Gerizim. It's part of the holy land. And somehow this proves his point. It confers special holiness on Mount Gerizim more than the rest of the land. Why? And Rabbi Yonasan stubbornly says, no, there was no flood, until he's silenced and the rider of his animal has to prove that there was a flood. But here, a very interesting idea is emerging, and it deals with the very nature of holiness. You see, we have to understand that throughout history there was a major disputation between the authentic Jews who always lived in the land and the Kusim who came from another country and were relocated there by the Assyrian king. The Kusim would always claim that they were the authentic Jews, till today. And that's why when the Jews wanted to rebuild the second temple in Jerusalem, the Kusim used very aggressive measures to try to stop them. They hunted down the Jews, they persecuted them, because they felt that the Jews were alien conquerors who came from Babylonia and were occupying land that did not belong to them. That's why the Jews used to call them Kusim, to emphasize that they came from Kusa, not from Israel, from the land of Kusa. They themselves did not call themselves Kusim, they called themselves Shomronim. Why Shomronim? Shomronim is the name of Shomron, Samaria, part of the land. Also comes from the word Shomer, preserve, that they are the ones who are preserving the Jewish tradition. They are from the original Jews. In fact, they used to claim that they are from the tribe of Joseph. They are from the children of Ephraim and Manasseh, and this is the territory that they had. They are original descendants of the Jewish people. So although this wasn't a very old historical truth that they were relocated by the Assyrian king, but after a few generations, they were propagating this fantasy that they were here forever. The moment the Jews entered into the land, they were here. And now when the Jews come back, Sheva Siyam, when the Jews come back during the beginning of the second temple to rebuild the second temple, there's a major fight. The book of Ezra and Nehemiah discusses this fight at length. What they are saying is the Persian Empire is a colonial empire who took the Jews who are living in Babylonia, in Iraq, and are planting them in foreign territory and soil, trying to displace the native citizens of the land who are the Kusim who always lived there. They are the real citizens, and the Jews are the occupiers, the aliens who are coming and trying to take over and conquer illegally the land from its true authentic masters, the Shomronim, the Samaritans. Sounds familiar? And this tension goes on throughout the entire Second Temple era. Because the 10 tribes were exiled 133 years before the destruction of the first temple. 70 years later, the Jews come back. Now, throughout the Second Temple era for 420 years, this tension continues going on. The Shomronim see in the Jews who lived during the Second Temple the descendants of the occupiers, of the alien settlers who came in, infiltrated, and occupied their land. The Jews, conversely, look at the Shomronim and they seize them as kusim. They were people who seized the land of the Jews while the Jews were punished and exiled from their land through God. As the Tanakh describes that the 10 tribes and the empire of the 10 tribes were morally degenerated and corrupt in horrific ways, and hence they were exiled. And as this was happening, the land was seized by the Kusim. This, it may be, is what is at the core of the argument. What the Kusi says is there was no flood in the Holy Land. You know why? Israel is not vulnerable to corruption. It's too sacred. It's holy. Therefore, no flood can destroy the land or can destroy the inhabitants of the land, because this is the land of sacredness. It's incorruptible. It's not corruptible. And therefore, certainly, if the flood couldn't reach the Holy Land, no nation could be exiled from this land. The land is holy, and as a result of this holiness, the inhabitants of the land are holy. The flood couldn't reach it, and nobody could have been exiled. So, Mele, you can't believe, therefore, you can't believe the Jews that they used to live there and they were exiled. Certainly, they were never there. The Shomronim, on the other hand, were always there. Rabbi Yonason at the end is silent. He's aware of the fact that there is even an opinion among our sages that there was no flood in the land of Israel. But he sees it from a different angle. So what the Kusi is trying to prove from the lack of the flood in the land of Israel is that this is ours. And Mount Gerizim is our mountain. Now we understand his logic. The fact that Israel did not have a flood shows it's not vulnerable to corruption. Nobody could have been exiled from here. This explains why they worshipped the image of a dove. Why a dove? Why pesel shel yoina? I spoke before, we had it in source number 5 from the Gemara in Chulin. Pesel shel yoina, you could look at it, they worshipped the image of a dove. Why a dove? You remember the story of the dove? Where does the dove emerge in the Bible? Noach sent the dove to go check if the earth is habitable, if they could come out of the ark. And the dove came out, it plucked on Ali Zayas, it plucked the leaf of an olive tree, and it brought it back to the ark of Noach. Where did the dove exactly get the leaf of an olive tree? If there was such a flood, the trees must have been destroyed, like all the people were destroyed. Where did the dove find a fresh leaf of an olive tree? Where? If it was just a floating leaf in the water somewhere, probably would also have been destroyed, but even if it was there, it wouldn't prove that the water receded. Where did the dove find this? This is an old question, everybody asks it. One of the opinions in the Medrash is that there was no flood in the land of Israel. And the dove went there, and the trees weren't destroyed there, and the dove took a leaf from an olive tree there. It's an opinion in the Medrash. There are other opinions. They worship now the image of the dove, which is the symbol of the lack of the flood, which for them symbolizes the fact that Israel is not corruptible. Now, to prove that this may be their philosophy, we have another verse in the Bible which actually explicitly says that this was the Jewish perspective before the destruction of the first temple and the exile of the other 2 tribes. Take a look, source number 8. Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah chapter 7 says, Yirmiyahu Zion says this. Listen to his words. Prophet Jeremiah was the prophet during the destruction of the first temple in the hands of the Babylonians. What does he say? Ka yamar Hashem tzvakas Elokei Yisrael. So said God. Heitivu darcheichem u'ma'alelechem. Enhance your ways and your schemes. V'ashakna eschem b'makom hazeh. So I will dwell with you in this place. Al tiftuchu lachem el divrei hasheker leimer. Do not rely and put your hope in the lies, saying, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, Heima. Here you have the chamber of God, the chamber of God, the chamber of God, and it cannot be destroyed. How can the house of God, how can the epicenter of holiness in the world be vulnerable to be consumed in Nebuchadnezzar's flames? Jeremiah says, don't listen to these false words. If you will enhance your ways and schemes, if you live with justice between one man and his fellow man, you won't rob a convert, an orphan, or a widow. You won't spill innocent blood in this place. You won't follow alien gods to your detriment. Then I will dwell with you in this land that I have given to your fathers for eternity, from eternity to eternity. Here we have the two perspectives. The Kusi is saying, you can't believe the Jews that they were exiled. There was no flood here. It's not vulnerable to destruction. What is Rabbi Yonason trying to say? That's not the case. But he's silenced because the Kusi proves indeed that there was no flood. Comes the Baam, comes the rider of the animal, and he proves from the verse that there was a flood in the Holy Land. What is the argument here? It's not just an argument if you could say the Jews were exiled and therefore they came back. That's on one level. But there's an argument here about the nature of holiness. The great blessing that's being given here. You should not be barren from a response. You should be able to respond to the Kusi. And even the riders of your animals should be able to respond. Is expressed in this story. Even the rider of the animal, who is connected very much with the physical land, with the physicality of the land. He is a rider of an animal in the land. Understands the nature of holiness very different than the Kusi understands it. The Kusi understands holiness as a privilege. It's a static reality. This is a holy place. Nothing can happen. Nobody can do anything to undermine it, to destroy it. The Jewish perspective on holiness is very different. Holiness is not just a privilege, it's also a responsibility. Holiness cannot cover up on the corruption of human beings who live in a holy place. On the contrary, the holiness of a particular place demands higher ethical and moral standards from the people who walk in the pathways of holiness and the people who live in a region of holiness. Holiness can't cover up immorality, promiscuity, corruption, and say, Heichel Hashem, Heichel Hashem, Heichel Hashem, Heima. This is divine, this is holy. On the contrary, if it's holy, it's more sensitive. And if it's more sensitive, the people who live there have to be more sensitive. And they have to live in a deeper, more holy, more sacred way. Don't look at holiness as an absolute thing that doesn't change. It's a dynamic. Holiness is a reality that we have to be sensitive to. And our own corruption can take us out of that place of holiness. And even the Baam, or maybe precisely the Baam, the rider of the animal connected to the earth of the land, to the physicality of the land in a very real way, understood this as the nature of holiness. Now it's interesting, if you take a look at source number 9, as I mentioned, in Gemara in Zvachim, there's an argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan says there was no flood in the Holy Land. Rish Lakish says there was a flood. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan agrees with this Kusi, who says there was no flood in the Holy Land. So that's number 9. You could take a look at it. So source number 10, Taisvus, in Zvachim Kuf Yud Gimel, asks the question, open up source number 10. Taisvus says, how can Rabbi Yochanan say there was no flood? We see from this medrash that this was the Kusi's opinion. And Taisvus gives 2 answers. Let me say the first answer is what? Taisvus says, even if there was no flood in the Holy Land, but the water still traveled there. And since the water still traveled there, therefore Mount Gerizim was still covered. The Kusi wanted to believe that even water did not travel there. No heat, no water, it was completely incorruptible. Rabbi Yochanan's opinion is no. The flood itself may have not been there, but the waters have traveled there and covered Mount Gerizim because the corruption of people wherever they live, even in the holiest land, does not get tolerated because it's a holy place. On the contrary, holiness merely means that we have to refine ourselves more and make ourselves worthy for the holiness. Not a privilege only, but a responsibility. I'll conclude with a story. There was once a Jew in the 1960s who visited Israel. And he took pictures. Every tourist, the main thing is to take pictures. It's sometimes even more important than the visit itself, as you know. If there was no picture, how are you going to tell people you were there? How are you going to know you were there? So he took pictures and pictures. The whole journey he took pictures. As he left the land, either his film got exposed. Remember, so the old cameras, the old negatives before digital or BlackBerry pictures. Either the film got exposed or he lost his film. He lost all of his pictures and he was devastated. So he wrote a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe asking why it happened to him. And I saw the letter, it's printed. The Rebbe wrote to him. I'm not telling you the answer verbatim, just the concept. The Rebbe said to him, maybe that one of the lessons for him is this. He went to the Holy Land. He left the land. If he would have had his pictures, he would have felt, I have been to the land. Look at all these pictures that I have to prove that I was here and there, and I took a picture with this person, and at this site, and at this grave, and at this location, and at this distraction. I was here. But you may have actually not been there. You may have physically been there, but you may have not absorbed the holiness of the land. The intense spirituality, the godliness of the land. Now you have no pictures. So this will challenge you to be able to make sure that you really have the land with you. Not just you have a picture of it, but that the holiness of it became part of you. Have a wonderful evening.